For generations, California wasn't just a place on a map. It was an idea, the California dream, right? It was this promise of endless sunshine, incredible opportunity, the freedom to just be whoever you wanted to be. It's the pull that brought millions of people west looking for gold or for fame or, just a better life. But for the nearly 40 million people who live there today, that dream is starting to feel, well, a little different. It's casting a really long shadow. And what we have now is this great California paradox, a state that's a global powerhouse of innovation and wealth, but at the same time, it's home to this absolutely crushing affordability crisis that's pushing its own people to the edge. So in this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers on that paradox. We're going beyond the headlines, using the hard data to really understand the forces at play, economic, demographic, even political, that are fundamentally reshaping the Golden State. Veteran California journalist Dan Walters, he really hits the nail on the head with this one. And for anyone living there, this isn't some hot take. It's just daily life. It's that feeling of being constantly squeezed, of paying a premium for, well, for everything, not just luxuries, but the basic stuff. It's just baked into the whole experience. But let's move past the feeling and actually look at the numbers. Just how high is the price of admission to this dream? Well, the answer is probably even more extreme than you think. And it all starts with the most basic thing of all, having a roof over your head. Okay, let's start with the cornerstone of the whole American dream, owning a home. Now, according to a projection from the Legislative Analyst's Office, by September of 2025, this is the minimum annual household income you'll need just to get a mortgage on a typical mid-tier home in California. Just let that number sink in for a second. Over $220,000. And we're not talking about a mansion in Malibu here. This is the entry fee for a standard middle-of-the-road home, the kind of place that's supposed to be the bedrock of a middle-class life. It's a staggering number that completely changes the game on who even gets to participate in that part of the California dream. Now hold that $221,000 number in your head and look at this one. This was the actual median household income for Californians in 2024. The gap here isn't just a crack in the foundation, it's a canyon. The income you need to buy a typical home is more than double what the typical household actually makes. I mean, this single comparison tells you so much of the story. It explains that constant economic anxiety that so many people feel, and it raises a really fundamental question. If the median family is completely priced out of buying the median home, then who is California even for? This massive affordability gap, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. It's a symptom of a much bigger, more complicated web of pressures, from the insane cost of just living day to day, to huge demographic shifts, to the, let's say, unintended consequences of some decades-old policies, and even the looming threat of environmental change. So we're going to dive deep into the data to understand all of it. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out the links in the description if you're looking for a real estate agent in your market or you need life insurance. My team and I can help you anywhere nationwide. Okay, let's get into it. All right, first things first, let's really put some numbers to this squeeze. We need to understand the true scale of the financial pressure that Californians are under. We'll start with housing, of course, but then we'll look at all the everyday things that just eat away at a paycheck, from the gas pump to the grocery store. The Legislative Analyst's Office basically confirms what we all suspect. California's housing market is just playing a completely different ballgame. And this isn't just an LA or a Bay Area problem. We're talking statewide. The price of a typical home is more than double what you'd pay for a similar house almost anywhere else in the US. It kind of creates this economic island. It's walled off from the rest of the country where the normal rules of affordability just don't seem to apply. And for anyone trying to move there, or for young people just trying to get started, that wall can feel impossible to climb. So what does twice as expensive actually feel like in your bank account every month? Well, it looks like this: $5,500. That's the approximate payment. We're talking principal, interest, taxes, and insurance for that same mid-tier home. And to put that into perspective, that single monthly payment is more than the entire pre-tax income for somebody earning $66,000 a year. And this isn't a new problem, it's been building for a while. That $5,500 payment is a 74% increase from what it was 25 years ago, and wages, for most people, have not kept up with that, not even close. So what's the inevitable result of this crazy affordability gap? Well, it's a huge drop in home ownership. At just 55.3%, California has the second lowest home ownership rate in the entire country. Only New York is lower. And look, that's not just a statistic. It represents a fundamental breakdown of that promise that if you work hard, you could own a little piece of the state you live in. For nearly half the population, that dream is just on hold, maybe forever. And it pushes them into this super competitive and expensive rental market where they face a whole other affordability crisis, but without any of the benefits of building equity. And this pressure, it doesn't stop at your front door. It seeps into almost every part of your day. I mean, California is a state that was built around the car, but the cost of gas is consistently one of the highest in the US. As you can see here, the average price for a gallon of regular is about a buck 50 higher than in a state like Texas. Now, that's because of a mix of higher state taxes and special environmental rules that require a more expensive blend of fuel. For a family with two cars, two commutes, that premium adds up to hundreds of extra dollars every single month. It is the exact same story when you get home and flip on the lights. On average, residential electricity rates in California are roughly double the national average. Why? Well, it's driven by the state's very ambitious clean energy goals, big investments in the grid to try and prevent wildfires, and just the high cost of maintaining this massive energy infrastructure. So every time you run the AC during a heat wave or charge your EV, you're paying a pretty significant premium. These aren't luxuries, they're necessities that come with a built-in California tax. The high costs even find their way into our traditions. A study by the California Farm Bureau found that a classic Thanksgiving dinner costs a lot more there. We're talking about a 30% markup on a meal that's a cornerstone of American family life. Now look, a $17 difference might not seem like a huge deal on its own, but it's a perfect little snapshot of the bigger issue, right? A little extra on gas, a little extra on utilities, a little extra on groceries. It all adds up to this constant, draining financial pressure that just doesn't leave a lot of room for savings or, for when life happens. So if your income isn't really going up, but your costs are soaring, how do you make it work? For millions of people, the answer is debt. And the data here is, well, it's pretty sobering. In just one 3-month period in 2025, the average California household added another $880 in new debt. The total average household debt is now over $250,000, the second highest in the US. But the most mind-boggling number is this one. The total personal debt held by all Californians is nearly $3.2 trillion. Let me put that in perspective for you. That number is almost the same as the entire state's annual personal income of $3.6 trillion. Think about that. Californians are borrowing almost as much as they earn in an entire year just to keep their heads above water. The data paints a pretty clear picture of immense financial strain. And when you're faced with that kind of relentless pressure day in and day out, you naturally start to rethink your choices. You start to ask if all the amazing things about living in California, the weather, the culture, the jobs, are they still worth the extraordinary cost? And that question is what's driving the next layer of our story, the massive demographic shifts that are happening right now. So this brings us to the next chapter, the big population shuffle that's going on. You hear it in the media all the time, right? The California exodus. But the truth is actually a lot more complicated than that. What we're really seeing is this complex churn, a great shuffle of people leaving, people arriving, and new generations being born. And all of it is creating a brand new demographic landscape for the state. Okay, this table from the Department of Finance might look a little dry, but it tells an incredible story. If you just glance at the bottom line, the net change seems like nothing, a tiny gain of about 19,000 people. But the numbers inside tell the real story. Look at that domestic migration line. A staggering 216,000 residents moved out to other U.S. states. That's a massive loss. But it's being almost perfectly balanced out by two other things. A big inflow of 126,000 people from other countries, and a natural increase of over 108,000 from births outpacing deaths. So the key takeaway isn't that California is emptying out. It's that it's being replaced. Domestic residents are leaving, and they're being replaced mainly by international immigrants and the children of the people who are staying. And it's really important to get this. This is not some new post-pandemic thing. This pattern of more people leaving California for other states than coming in has been happening consistently for more than 2 decades. It's a slow, steady bleed of residents. For a whole generation, California has been a net exporter of its own people to the rest of the country, mostly to places like Texas, Arizona, and Nevada, where, no surprise, the cost of living is a lot lower. The high cost of living is the obvious driver here. It's the most powerful one. But what if there's more to it? What if there are other, less visible forces at work? Rules and policies that were put in place decades ago that create these powerful, sometimes weird, incentives that either lock people in place or push them out. That question takes us to the next, and honestly most fascinating part of this whole story. So now we're going to look under the hood at the invisible architecture of California's real estate market. These are the rules of the game. They were set a long time ago, but they have had these huge and often unintended consequences on who can afford to live where, who has a reason to stay put, and who has a reason to leave. Okay, at the heart of this whole system is Proposition 13. This was a massive constitutional amendment that voters passed back in 1978 during a tax revolt. On the surface, it seems simple. It caps your property taxes at 1% of what you paid for your house. But here's the kicker. It limits any increase in your home's assessed value to a maximum of 2% a year, no matter how much the house's actual market value skyrockets. Your tax base only resets to the new higher price when the property gets sold. And this one single rule has totally warped the state's housing market for over 40 years. This table right here shows you the lock-in effect of Prop 13 perfectly. It's wild. So imagine two homeowners. They live in identical houses right next to each other, both worth $1.5 million today. Homeowner A bought their house back in 1980 for 100 grand. Today, they pay only about $2,200 a year in property taxes. Why? Because their assessed value has only been allowed to go up by that tiny 2% cap each year. Meanwhile, homeowner B just bought the identical house next door for $1.5 million. Their annual property tax bill? $15,000. So there is a massive, and I mean massive, financial reason for homeowner A to never ever move. If they sold and bought another house for the same price, their tax bill would jump by almost 7 times overnight. They are literally locked into their home by the tax code. Now, to be fair, the original intention behind this law wasn't to mess everything up. The goal, as the Supreme Court noted back in '92, was to protect homeowners, especially older people and fixed incomes, from being taxed right out of their homes as property values went crazy. The ideal was to create neighborhood stability to let people stay in the communities they helped build. The big questions now, though, are, did it work, and what were the unforeseen side effects? Well, the data is pretty clear. Prop 13 absolutely created stability, maybe a little too much. Between 1970 and 2000, the average amount of time a California homeowner stayed in a house went up by a full 10% compared to other states. But here's what's even crazier, the effect on renters. Their average time in one place went up by almost 20%. And what that suggests is that with fewer homes turning over from these longtime owners, there's just less housing available on the market for everyone else. It shrinks the supply, which drives up prices and forces younger people and newcomers to rent for longer. The whole market just gets gummed up. And this idea of California's unique laws creating these powerful incentives to move, it isn't just about some 40-year-old tax law. We're seeing a really modern version of this play out in an industry that didn't even exist when Prop 13 passed, the world of social media influencers. It's another fascinating case of a specific California rule having huge consequences. As we get into this, I want to take a quick moment to remind you, if you're finding this explainer valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And check out the links in the description if you're looking for a real estate agent in your market or you need life insurance. My team and I can help you anywhere nationwide. Okay, so let's look at another unique California law that's been making headlines. This is often called the Coogan Law, and we're looking at a specific piece of the California Family Code that is aimed directly at the modern creator economy. What it says is that for any kid earning money in entertainment, and they've now explicitly included social media, 15% of their gross earnings has to be put into a special blocked trust account. It's called a Coogan account, and the child can't touch that money until they're a legal adult. The backstory here is straight out of old Hollywood. The law is named after Jackie Coogan, one of the very first big child stars from the silent film era. As a kid, he earned millions of dollars, which was an insane amount of money at the time. But when he grew up, he found out his parents had spent almost all of it. His lawsuit led California to pass the original Coogan Law back in 1939 to protect future child actors. For decades, it did its job in TV and movies, but as entertainment changed, the law didn't keep up. It actually took until the 2020s for the state to finally update it to specifically include the new generation of child stars, social media influencers, and family vloggers. And this is where this story gets a little controversial. In the last few years, several really big family vlogger channels and influencers, like the LeBrant family and Brittany Xavier, have very publicly announced they're leaving California. They often move to places like Tennessee or Texas that don't have these kinds of specific child labor protections. The reasons they give are often a bit vague, a desire for a slower pace of life or concerns about politics, but a lot of people are skeptical. The timing of their moves, often happening right as these financial protections for their kids are being strengthened, has made a lot of people wonder what the real motivation is. Is it a coincidence, or is the desire to avoid setting aside that 15% and keep total control over their kids' earnings the real reason for the move? Okay, so we've looked at the economic pressures of today and the legacy policies of the past. But now we have to turn to the future. And we have to look at a challenge that honestly threatens to make all these other issues look small by comparison. It's a force that could trigger migration and displacement on a scale California has never seen before: climate change. And look, this isn't some far-off abstract idea. The threat is so real and so serious that the state government itself has commissioned UC Berkeley's Human Rights Center to lead a huge study on this exact topic. They are actively trying to predict how climate-driven disasters, we're talking wildfires, floods, sea level rise, extreme heat, how these events are going to force huge numbers of Californians out of their homes, and what the ripple effects will be for the entire state. The potential impacts of this kind of internal migration are just massive. It touches every single thing we've already talked about, and it just makes existing problems even worse. I mean, when a whole community is displaced by a megafire, it puts incredible strain on the economy. It overwhelms the housing and transportation in the areas where people flee to. It stresses the healthcare systems, the energy grid. It even tears apart the social fabric and the identity of the communities people leave behind, and the ones that suddenly have to absorb thousands of new residents. And if you want to understand the potential scale here, we don't have to look at some sci-fi projection. We can look at a realistic scenario based on what's already happened. In a simulated event that mirrors the tragic fires in the LA area in January 2025, you could see evacuation orders for as many as 200,000 residents. That's the entire population of a city like Modesto being told to leave their homes, all at the same time. Now imagine several events like that happening, with more and more frequency up and down the state. And this brings us to what might be the scariest question of all. This future wave of climate migrants, they will be moving to Arizona or Texas. They'll be moving from one part of California to another, from fire-prone areas to already packed cities, from vulnerable coastal towns to inland valleys that have their own heat and water problems. And it raises this really critical existential point. How can a state that already has a severe housing shortage and an insane affordability crisis possibly handle a huge climate-driven internal migration? It is quite literally a crisis on top of a crisis. So, after going through all these different layers, the crushing economics, the shifting demographics, the weird old policies, and the looming environmental threats, what we're left with is a deeply complex picture. The decision to live in or to leave California, it's not a simple choice anymore. It's a calculation. It's this multivariable equation where every single person and every family has to weigh the enormous benefits against the enormous costs. So let's just recap the four big pressures we've talked about. First, the relentless economic squeeze, where the cost of basically everything, especially housing, has just left average incomes in the dust. Second, the great demographic shuffle, this long-term trend of domestic residents moving out being replaced by international immigrants and natural growth. Third, the policy lock-in, where old laws like Prop 13 are still twisting the market, reducing housing supply and making the affordability crisis worse. And finally, the huge shadow of environmental threats, promising a new wave of internal migration that the state is just not ready for. I want to thank you for joining us for this analysis, and as a final reminder, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out the links in the description if you're looking for a real estate agent in your market or you need life insurance. My team and I can help you anywhere nationwide. These four immense pressures, they all converge to create the California we see today. It is still a place of incredible beauty, of innovation, of opportunity, but it's also a place of immense and growing challenges. And all of this leads us with the ultimate question. Is that classic California dream, that idea of a comfortable, middle-class life with a house and a yard that you could earn through hard work, is that dream actually fading away? Or is it something else? Is it just being rewritten, transformed into some new 21st century version that's maybe only accessible to a select few at the top and is defined by a whole new set of rules and realities? That is the question that millions of Californians are trying to answer for themselves and for their families every single day.